Five, four, three, two, one.
Welcome to Our Voices. I have a special guest with me. He is Glenn Elliott. He is the Democratic nominee for the candidate for running for U.S. Senate to represent West Virginia. Glenn, how are you doing today?
I am doing fine. I think you had it right. I actually am the Democratic nominee in West Virginia for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Senator Joe Manchin.
Okay. Um, Again, thank you for coming on. We have a
Mhm.
lot to go over. Um, I do have some questions to ask you. Again, thank you for taking the time to do this interview with me.
Sure.
But first, before I go into my questions, please tell the audience who is Glenn Elliott.
Well, born and raised in Wheeling, West Virginia. That's my hometown. I um, I graduated high school in 1990, and saw a town around me that was really contracting and shrinking. I didn't see a future in Wheeling or really anywhere in West Virginia. So I ended up moving and went to college and went to DC. Never really planning on coming back to West Virginia because I didn't see a future here. But I along the way, landed an internship with Senator Robert Byrd. Worked for him for 5 years in his DC office. That kept me connected to the state a little bit. Then I went to law school and did that. I worked at a big law firm for about 7.5, 8 years until I realized it's not what I wanted to do with my life. So I moved back to Wheeling in 2009 at the age of 38, kind of looking just for a reboot, and fell in love with Wheeling really for the second time. Things I didn't appreciate or didn't things I had taken for granted really caught my eye. Saw some opportunities with a lot of historic architecture here, and bought an old building, made it my lifelong project. I now live in it with my wife and son, and ran for mayor in 2016, and then got uh, uh, won that race and got reelected in 2020. So I'm a two-term mayor of Wheeling. Decided to get in the U.S. Senate race in January of this year, not too long after Senator Manchin announced his retirement from this office. So, in terms of elected experience, I'm someone who uh, does have 8 years running a city in West Virginia. I believe, the state's fifth largest city, and I also have 5 years working in the U.S. Senate for the senator who preceded Senator Manchin in this office. So I have a lot of experience that I think is relevant for this race.
All right, we'll get started. You ready?
Let's do it.
Okay. Glenn, what inspired you to run for U.S. Senate?
Well, I'll be honest, it wasn't there's not a lot of offices that I probably would have considered at this time. Um, I got married a little bit later in life. I have a 2-year-old son. We now have a daughter on the way. And as my time as mayor was winding down, I really thought, this might be a time just to set it out for a while, really focus on family. And because being mayor, even though on paper it was a part-time job in Wheeling, in reality it was a full-time job. So I, I, um, you know, I was planning on stepping aside for a while and putting my political career on hold. But then when Senator Manchin stepped out of that race, I had to give it a lot of thought because the U.S. Senate to me is special. When I worked there for Senator Byrd years ago, I saw what it can do to benefit the state. Driving around the state the last few months, you see all the different projects and highways and bridges, dams, all the infrastructure brought to the state by Senator Byrd through the power of that Senate seat. So to me, it's a special seat. I've also worked with Senator Manchin in my capacity as mayor, and so I've seen what good it can do. I recognize that our politics is not in the best place right now, but I really do think there's an opportunity in this particular race if I can cut through some of the noise. Running against an opponent in this race who's a little bit flawed, I do think there's an opportunity to cut through and really just remind West Virginia voters of what's at stake and what it takes to be a good senator. So I thought, you know what? this race is worth it. It's not just any particular race. It's a very special seat that has historical significance in West Virginia. I'm going to give it my best.
Glenn, how does your personal and professional experiences prepare you to represent West Virginia in the Senate?
Well, between the two candidates in this race, myself and Governor Justice, I have 5 years working in the Senate. I have 8 years as mayor. I have almost 8 years working as an attorney at an international law firm that, really did, a lot of complicated transactions. I was a transaction attorney. So I know how to read budgets. I know how to put budgets together. I, I, I have accounting experience. I have legal experience. I have political experience. Quite frankly, I have the energy. So I think if you look at my portfolio of experience, I began life, living in a mobile home like a lot of West Virginians, and have really, everything I own today is something that I worked for. I know the value of hard work. I know how hard it is for West Virginia families to make ends meet sometime. And to me, I'm the better qualified of the two in this race. So I think, my background, my professional experiences all kind of lend into a really qualified Senate candidate.
West Virginia has a significant reliance on coal and energy industries. How do you plan to balance the need for economic development with environmental concerns and the transition to renewable energy?
Sure. Look, anybody running for state office in West Virginia knows the importance of coal and fossil fuels, both historically and in present day to the state. But everybody has to at least acknowledge where the world is heading. We can't put our heads in the sand and just cling to industries against all evidence that they are at some point going to be on their way out. And it's not that we're going to drive them out. It's that the private sector at some point, it's not hard to imagine 10, 15 years from now that Fortune 500 companies will, just as a general rule, have it in their bylaws not to consume any power that's not made from clean renewable resources. So it's in our interest to begin, embracing a diversity of ways of producing energy. That doesn't mean we put coal miners out of business. It doesn't mean we stop fracking tomorrow. What that means is we kind of look at an all of the above energy policy. So we embrace other technologies instead of just supporting one or favoring one. There are some opportunities I've seen across the state. There are opportunities for wind power that are being embraced right now, solar power as well. I don't think we've even tapped the hydropower and geothermal power opportunities we have in West Virginia. I'm not even afraid to talk about nuclear power as something. It has a bad reputation in this country, mostly because of one accident in 1979 at 3 Mile Island. But for the most part, it's far safer and cleaner than a lot of fossil fuels. So that's something I'm willing to look at as well. And, as we transition out of the fossil fuel industry, it's going to happen over the next 15, 20 years. We have to absolutely make sure that West Virginia is made whole, because we've paid an incredible burden and price for being one of the nation's primary producers of power going back a century now. All the coal that was mined in West Virginia has been utilized for so many different needs, including steel production, including actually powering so much of our economy. West Virginia we can't just turn off the switch and say, thank you, West Virginia, we're going to move on to something else now. West Virginia needs to be made whole. And there are some communities, I've been to many across the state. We began a statewide tour down in Welch in McDowell County. Communities have been decimated by the decline of the coal industry over the last 50, 60, 70 years. We got to figure out ways to bring those communities back. And I think it's fair to ask for the federal government to play a role in helping bring back those towns in West Virginia that have been most damaged or impacted by the decline of the coal industry. So that's something I'll look at, very much. I'll look for above, top down. I'm sorry, not top down. Across the board, all of the above approach to energy, and on the one hand, and making sure that West Virginia is made whole on the other hand, I think is something that it's inconceivable to me that West Virginia doesn't get actually made whole for all the suffering that we've done, for the miners who've died in mines, for the miners who have black lung who've died or currently have black lung. Sorry, the sun is slowly coming down here in the window here, if
Okay.
you can notice me there. So yeah, it's it's got to be at all of the above. We can't put our head in the sand and pretend that the world's not changing. But I'm not running for Senate to put coal miners out of business or to end fracking. I'm running for U.S. Senate to make sure that going forward we have somebody who can see what's going to happen across the world, and make sure that West Virginia is the best prepared for the changes that are coming, and that involves being prepared and actually embracing multiple ways of producing power, not just one or two.
Glenn, uh, as we are in the 21st century, West Virginia does need to move forward, of course, with renewable energy. My question to you is, what about tech jobs, things of that sort?
Yeah,
Would you be willing to help bring tech jobs here to West Virginia?
absolutely, and it's an incredible opportunity we have. As miners are losing jobs or whatever, or being phased out of their jobs, they often have skill sets that lends itself to different types of tech jobs. We just need to make sure that there are federal and state resources, provided to them along the way, so they can get that on the job training. And so, as they're being pushed out of one industry, there's another door opening for them. We have some of the hardest workers in the country. Working in a coal mine is brutal work. I took a tour of a mine last month. What matters, what the type of energy and skill and work ethic it takes to show up each and every day and go underground, really prepares you for a lot of other industries as well. We just got to make sure that we get folks all the tools that they need, because I do think there's an opportunity for tech jobs here that we don't currently see. We've seen some sort of targeted areas, but I think it's a broader opportunity. In fact, tech makes a lot of sense in West Virginia because our topography does not lend itself to a lot of different widespread industries because we don't have a lot of flat land to build on. And if you want to build, a multi-acre industrial plant, West Virginia is not exactly ripe with opportunities. You have to flatten hills before you do so. So tech jobs, I think, are ideal for us given our topography and given some of the work ethic that we have. If we can just actually repoint some of those skills towards tech jobs, I think it's a great opportunity for us going forward.
Glenn, the state of West Virginia has been hit hard with the opioid crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What are your plans to combat this crisis here in West Virginia?
Well, I think, we've made a lot of progress in recent years, at least identifying the problem. And quite frankly, one way that I differ with some politicians is I don't put the blame always at the feet of the people who end up addicted. I think there were definitely efforts by big pharma to get a lot of people addicted by peddling these pills that then doctors in turn were prescribing, quite frankly, irresponsibly to people across the state for chronic pain issues, basically creating a statewide, audience there that is especially prone to being addicted to opioids. So there's a lot of blame to go around. So, what we have to do going forward is a couple things, but we have to focus on the prevention side early on in folks' lives. We have to focus on healthier outcomes in general. Because if you get into situations where you need pain medicine in the first place, you're more likely to be susceptible to these types of drugs. And also, if you grow up in communities that don't have, actual hope or opportunity, drugs end up being something you do because you don't have any better options in front of you. We have to give our young people in this state, more opportunities growing up. I've been traveling this state for the last several months. I've been to all 55 counties talking to people, and we had definitely the last 30 or 40 years of West Virginia, our biggest export has not been coal or natural gas. It's been our young people. So we don't have a lot of young people still here. And those who are here too often, grow up in communities that don't have a lot of hope. So they turn to opioids as a way out or as an escape. So you got to give people hope on the front end. All that being said, at the end of the day, some people are going to end up addicted going forward. The question is what to do with them. Politicians like to talk about, cracking down on drugs and putting people in jail. And that always seems like the politically a popular answer. For me, violent criminals belong in jail, but drug users who really only harm themselves is a very different story. I think we need to look at all the alternatives to jail. Expanding the drug court system we have across the state. Give people options so they don't. If they make a bad choice to begin with, they don't end up with multiple felony convictions along the way, which then make it almost impossible to get a good job down the road. Make it hard to even rent an apartment. I know that from my own business. One of my personal businesses is a property management company, and we put people through a background check. And if people show up with a felony conviction, it's often pretty hard to justify to the property owner, oh, we should put them at a property. So we have too many people, getting on drugs and then ending up with uh, a very long rap sheet that makes them unemployable and really makes it almost impossible for them to get housing. And then we act surprised when things don't work out well for them. If you don't have a job and if you don't have adequate housing, you're going to turn back to crime. You're going to be right back where you started from. So we got to make sure that we're not putting people in prison just for being addicted to drugs. We got to get them help. But I'd like to see a lot fewer people, turn to drugs in the first place. But that starts with economic opportunity in their communities.
Glenn, how do you view the current state of partisanship in the Senate? And would you be willing to work across the aisle to help bridge the divide in the Senate?
The U.S. Senate, used to be when I worked there in the 90s, it was starting to take a turn to where we see today. But it used to be a collegial environment where you had Republicans and Democrats. They would have their arguments during the day. And then if you found yourself at one of the Capitol Hill bars afterwards, you see Republicans sitting with Democrats and vice versa. It trickled down to the staff level. I worked for a Democratic senator and Senator Byrd, but I had friends who worked for Republican senators, and we would always hang out. We didn't let our political battles become personal. Fast forward to 2024, and it's a different world there now. The Senate work week has condensed to about a day and a half or so. So they're not in town that much to even get to know each other. When they are in town, they stay in their own bubbles. If you go out afterwards and there are now Republican bars and there are Democratic bars where they hang out, but they don't even intermingle. It's really become, we get our news from different sources too. Democrats will watch MSNBC, Republicans will watch Fox News, and they're actually consuming a different reality. And so it's not surprising to me that then when they go to the Senate floor, they're talking past each other sometimes because there's not even ability to see things in a common way when you don't agree on the underlying facts. No one senator is going to be able to change that. I would love to think that I could go there and just instill wisdom into folks to wake up, but it's going to take some concerted effort. The current occupant of the seat, Senator Manchin, has tried really hard during his time in Washington to bring the two sides together. He is very much a centrist at heart, and he's tried to encourage others to follow him in that. And he'll be the first to tell you that it's had very limited success. One of the problems is what I alluded to a second ago, is the work week is so condensed. They schedule all the roll call votes between Tuesday at noon and Thursday at noon. So you basically have 48 hours or so when members are in D.C. for roll call voting. And the rest of the time, they're back in their districts to raise money or campaign. And the fact of the matter is they rarely get to know each other during that time. It used to be in the old days, the Senate was a 5-day work week, and senators would move their whole families there. And they'd get to know each other. They'd break bread with each other. They'd get to know each other's spouses and children, and develop friendships. Senator Byrd had friendships with people across the political spectrum. From probably his two best friends were Ted Stevens, a pretty far right conservative from Alaska, and Ted Kennedy, about as far left as you could get at the time, a Democrat from Massachusetts. Byrd loved them both because they both all respected each other. It didn't matter different political ideologies. We have to get past that. At the end of the day, we're Americans first, and when we're fighting with each other the way we are, all it's doing is empowering our actual enemies. We need to be able to disagree without being disagreeable, as the saying goes. And I would definitely be a voice for that. But again, it's going to take more than just one or two senators. It's going to take a national awakening that we have to stop hating each other. We have to start listening to each other. And I think that's what's missing right now, is because we're consuming different sets of news, and we need to find, I guess, some a basic consensus on what the facts are, and just have our different takes on it, and stop, believing in different sets of facts, because that is a recipe for disaster. And Lincoln himself said that a nation divided cannot stand. We have to wake up before we are or do tear this country apart from the inside.
Glenn, what are your views on the George Floyd policing bill? Where do you stand? And would you vote in favor?
Yeah, based on what I have read about it, yes, I would vote for it. I remember when that happened. I was mayor of Wheeling when that happened, and we had a good relationship with our police department. And I talked about that specific legislation with our police department, and they did have some concerns, and they weren't entirely invalid. There were some real concerns, so I'd have to look. It's been a couple of years since I've looked at the bill in great detail, but the overall point of the bill is to make sure that the police system that we have treats everybody fairly, regardless of their economic background, their race, their ethnicity, whatever. And the fact that some people don't feel the police are there to protect them is not acceptable. Whether it's just a perception or whether it's reality, we want to live, or I want to live in a world where everyone thinks the police are there to protect them. Because the reality is, for most people, if you grew up, if you grew up white in a middle class or wealthy neighborhood, in your mind, the police are always there to help you and protect you. You never have any reason to question that. The fact that there are some people who do have reason to question that means we have more work to be done. As I understand the bill, or remember the bill, it's been a couple of years since I've looked at it in detail. I think there's a lot of stuff in there that would do a lot of good towards making sure that the police departments that we have the support of everyone across the community. You're never going to live in a completely race-free, bias-free world, but we can go a lot further than we've gone. I do think, one thing that conservatives sometimes say is, well, we've made a lot of improvements since I pick a year in the past, and that's true. But we can never be complacency. Dr. King himself talked about the arc of justice, bending towards justice, or whatever. The more arc of the universe bending towards justice. Well, sometimes you have to nudge it along the way. It doesn't bend on its own. And even though we never may get to that perfect point, I think we always need to be pushing to do a little bit better. I want everyone growing up in this country, when they hear sirens, whatever, coming down the street, to think that the people in those driving those vehicles are there to protect them. And until we can say that, it's absolutely imperative that we do more, just to make sure that we're forming the most complete and perfect union that we can, recognizing that we'll never achieve the perfection, but I think we can go further than we have.
Glenn, the John Lewis voting rights bill.
Yes.
Would you vote to reinstate that bill?
110%. Nothing angers me more when I see politicians making efforts to make it harder for certain people to vote. It is as un-American an idea as you can have. Look, voters should be picking their politicians. A politician shouldn't be picking their voters. And anytime you have efforts to cut people out of the voting process by making it harder to vote in certain areas based on whatever ethnicity happens to live there, there's something inherently un-American about it. I do think, that's something where there is a very strong role for the federal government to play, to make sure that there's some uniform standard of voting access across the country. You see what happens in states like Georgia, where they've actually made it a crime to give water to somebody standing in line to vote. There's no good reason for such a law like that, except to keep certain people from voting in the first place. And shame on those who would try to purvey these laws and ideas. Look, Um, there are those politicians among us who know that a lot of their policies don't have Democratic majorities, and so they spend so much time and energy trying to shrink uh, those the voting population of those who could actually vote them in or out of office. Uh, is if they spent half that time just trying to actually look at their own policies themselves and ask themselves why are these policies unacceptable to such a large proportion of the population, I think we'd all be in a much better situation. But some of them just take the easy way out and they try to limit access to voting. Look, well, what is more American than voting itself? It was the one thing that we did that made us stand apart more than anything else from England at the time. Is giving people putting the power of the people front and center in the Constitution, letting them pick their leaders. Now that we have efforts, and look, there's some ugly history when you look at Jim Crow laws and poll taxes and other thing else, all designed to keep basically minorities from voting. The fact that that's still going on in 2024 sickens me. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act bill, as I understand it, would empower the federal government to make sure that there are some minimum standards out there across the country. I would 110% vote for it, and that would be one of my priorities if elected to get that on the get that bill through the Senate, and hopefully, find a House of Representatives that would work with you and get it on the president's desk who would sign it.
Glenn, do you agree with people who own public assistance? Do you agree with them having to take a drug test?
That's not something I've spent a lot of time thinking about. I don't know. Again, I have a much bigger problem with people having full-time jobs at places like Walmart and still being on public assistance than I do with people on public assistance using drugs. That's a bigger issue or a separate question, maybe. But I think at the end of the day, we need to be looking at ways to get people off public assistance, but I don't think they need to be mean-spirited. We need to be looking at ways to give people incentives to better themselves, not necessarily cracking down on those who may be addicted. Stuff like that makes me uncomfortable. But I'll be honest, I haven't. It's not an issue that I focused on a lot in this campaign, to where we need to go any further than we already are in terms of limiting benefits to people. I'm more interested in doing things to get an economy that works so people don't need public assistance in the first place. Like I said, we have employers like Walmart who have a lot of employees who work there 35, 40 hours a week and still qualify for public assistance. That's a problem. If you have a full-time job, if you spend 40 plus hours a week away from your family and you still don't have enough money to take care of your family, that's a problem. Companies like Walmart are doing very well if I read their stock reports. So, we need to look at raising the minimum wage and getting more people, into gainful employment, and so we don't have so many people on these public assistance roles in the first place. But beyond that, look, if you're a single parent, and I know this well because my parents were divorced. My mom was a single parent with me for the first 6 years of my life, and I know how hard it was for her. If you're a single parent, you have to be very careful about laws that are too hard on the parent if you also have a child involved. Some parents, aren't always going to be perfect, but the worst thing you could do is penalize a kid for their wrongdoing. So these things need to be thought through. It sounds really easy for politicians to say you want to crack down on some welfare person who's just sitting there all day, using drugs. That's not the typical person. I've talked to a lot of people on this campaign trail who are on public assistance, and I think most of them would much rather, have a job where they feel good about themselves, and not have to rely on public assistance in the first place. But some of our communities, that's not possible. And sometimes because of our state, like West Virginia, where we have such limited childcare, it's impossible if you can't get childcare for a single parent in the first place to even have a job, unless the job itself has a childcare facility. So that's something, I'd like to see a child tax credit reinstated. I'd like to see expanded a child care tax credit as well, so that single families with children, or two income families with children, have better options for the kids to be taken care of in the first place, and so they can actually go out and get a job without having to rely on public assistance in the first place. So it's a complicated thing. You can't just look at that without looking at all the related factors. I'm not sure I answered your question entirely, but I have to look at any specific proposal to get into it, in this particular situation. But to me, it's just it sounds like a mean-spirited way to stigmatize a group of people and not really help them get better outcomes in their life in the first place, which should be the goal of public assistance. Is not It should be to get you off of public assistance, not to keep you on it.
Your opponent, according to news media, has run into a little financial burden with paying taxes.
Yeah. That's an understatement, right? But yes.
What what are your thoughts on that? Do you feel that there should be some type of audit to see if
Yeah.
Share your thoughts on that, please.
Yeah, well, look, one of the things that has so confounded me is that the Governor Justice has remained popular in the state, despite behaving in ways that none of us would ever think to. Here's a man who was born on third base. By all accounts, he was born into a wealthy family, and if you look at the way he behaves, I really think that he thinks that when he was born, he'd already hit a triple. He doesn't appreciate the gifts that he's been given in terms of the economic opportunity that he's had in his life to inherit a huge business with thousands of employees. Um, you know, he's been given a gift. I don't think he appreciates it, and I think along the way he's learned to kind of see the world as his for the taking. So if you talk to people who've done business with him for years, no one will extend him any credit anymore. He can only buy things if he gives them cash on delivery because he's known for not paying his bills. If you look around the state, multiple counties around the state now where he's behind, seriously delinquent in paying his property taxes. And what does that hurt? Like that hurts schools. That hurts county commissions. That is real dollars that are not going to schools in communities that absolutely need it today because the governor's not paying property taxes as a so-called billionaire. Then you look at some of the stuff that's happened this year, where he was, the Greenbrier, like a lot of businesses, retail businesses, it collects sales tax for every transaction that it has. Under state law, that sales tax money is never yours as the business owner. All you are is a trustee. You take the sales tax money and then you have to send it to the state. At one point, he was $2 or $3 million delinquent in actually turning over that sales tax money to the state. I think some still hasn't been turned over to it. It's never his to begin with, but it's clear that what he did was take that money and use it to spend on some other debt that he had. Take money that was never his to begin with and use it for his own personal uses. That's not something you do unless you feel like the world is yours for the taking. And then just about a month ago, we learned he was actually taking money out of the employees' paychecks at the Greenbrier that's supposed to go for their health insurance premiums and then not remitting them to the insurance company, using that money for something else. And there's a word for that where I come from up here in Wheeling, and it's called stealing. But for whatever reason, and it absolutely boggles the mind, people just think, oh, that's just Jim being Jim. Well, no, it's Jim being, highly unethical, maybe fraudulent, and actually maybe engaging in criminal conduct right in front of our eyes, and people really not seeming to mind about it. He thinks a different set of rules apply to him, and it's something, in the balance of his campaign, it's on me to remind people of the choice that they have. I'm someone born into a mobile home. I understand, how hard it can be to pull yourself up when that ladder, when those first few rungs of that ladder aren't readily reachable, right? The governor was born way up here somewhere, and now that he has businesses, skirting with bankruptcy, maybe he's not even that good at business in the first place. And maybe that's why he's focused on politics now for his reputation. I don't know. But he has a bad habit of thinking the things that aren't his are his. And, that's not something you want to send to Washington, especially someone with the debts that he has, debts to Russian and Saudi interests that don't always have our country's best interest in mind. I don't even think the governor could pass a basic background check to get a security clearance, to get intelligence briefings as a U.S. senator, because of the debts he has to countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia. That's where we are with this man. I just think more people need to realize
it. Glenn, where do you stand on immigration?
it.
And how would you go about trying to come up with a solution that will
Yeah.
be beneficial from a secure and from a secure point of view and a compassionate point of view?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned secure and compassionate because it has to be both, Ray. But um, look, I'm not going to defend the first couple of years of the Biden administration when it comes to the border. I think they let things get a little too loose down there, and I think we had some problems as a result. But I will say this: President Biden did offer to work with the Republicans in the Senate to put together a compromise border bill that had a lot of stuff that Republicans are usually clamoring for in terms of border security. It also had some stuff in there to really straighten up some of the issues with the legal asylum process. And it had a lot of things in there in terms of actually adding more border agents. It's a lot of things that I think are good policies that would strengthen our border. And that deal was negotiated in the Senate. Senator James Lankford was the lead on it, but Senator Manchin from West Virginia was involved in those discussions. That bill was served up and ready to be signed by President Biden. But then what happened is the candidate running for president on the other side said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 guys! If you pass this bill, it's going to hurt my chances in November. So don't pass this bill." So all the Republicans in the Senate then stopped working on that bill, and it died. That to me is unacceptable because we had a bill. It would have improved the situation at the border. It would have, fixed up some of the issues that lead to ambiguities with the asylum process and beyond that. Like that bill could be the law of the land right now, were it not for the other side playing politics. Look, we need a strong border. We can't. I'm not someone who is would ever try to stoke anti-immigrant rhetoric, but we can't have a border that's loosely watched and porous because there are a lot of people in the world who want to do us harm. I'm all for having a secure border, but I also am all for America being that beacon of hope that a lot of people from around the world are drawn to. President Reagan back in the day talked about that, and somehow a lot of folks in his party have forgotten that America at its core is an idea that has nothing to do with race or ethnicity or religion or anything else. It's an idea. And that idea should be available for anyone who's willing to go through the legal processes to get here. So I think we do need to straighten up our process for bringing people in here legally who are going to play by the rules. We actually need a lot of people to do a lot of jobs that a lot of Americans don't want to do. We have a lot of people coming over illegally now to do those jobs. I'd rather see them come over legally for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's safer for them. But number two, if they're here legally, then they're paying FICA taxes, which are going to strengthen our current Social Security and Medicare trust funds to help us where we are right now, which is where we're seeing a lot of strain on the baby boomers retiring right now. So that's putting a lot of pressure on our Social Security Medicare trust funds. We need more people working today and fixing the immigration system and getting more of the people here doing a lot of jobs that Americans don't want to do. Getting those people here legally now is absolutely in our long-term interest. And, it's a shame that we have to have this rhetoric getting people to see immigrants as somehow other or as violent or as more dangerous. Look, the immigrants who come here are by and large much less violent than Americans are. There's a lot. You always find the one or two stories that makes national news, and the conservative media will jump on it. If somebody gets killed by an undocumented person, it's going to be a national news story. But by and large, they commit a lot less crimes than Americans do because they don't want to get caught because they're here working in jobs, under the table. And if they get caught, they know they'll get sent home. So that's why they don't commit crimes. Look, we need to have an immigration system that is both strong in terms of making sure we have secure borders, but the word that you use, Ray, compassionate, is also true. We want to be the beacon for countries around the world to say, look, if you're in a place, if where your rights are being trampled on, where your children are going to grow up without the rights that you had. If you want a place, where you will be, or where your work ethic will be valued, America is that place. If you want to come here and play by the rules and actually raise your family here and buy into our system, there are opportunities for you. We've been built by immigrants. I was mayor of Wheeling, and people in Wheeling are quick to remind you that our city's growth all came around the turn of the 19th century to the 20th, and it was driven almost entirely by immigrants from a wide variety of countries, from Italy, from Poland, from Germany, from Ukraine and Russia. Uh, we had immigrants from Lebanon, um, uh, uh, a whole bunch of different other countries came here and really built a very diverse community in Wheeling of immigrants. And most of the buildings around town here are named for people who came here as immigrants. But we forget that sometimes, and I think it's a shame that we have those who want to demonize an entire group of people just for votes or fear, and to get local Americans or whatever to fear them because they're somehow scary. There's nothing scary about someone who wants to come here and better his or her life and work for his family and work hard. We need to be an opening country that welcomes people of all different backgrounds and creeds, uh, as long as they play by the rules.
Glenn, if elected to the Senate,
Mhm.
how will you ensure that West Virginia's voices will be heard in Washington?
Well, if you look at the way I've run this campaign, that's a lot of the way I would act as a senator. It's the same way that I was when I was mayor. I try to meet people where they are. We've knocked on several thousand doors in all 55 counties of the state right now. I challenge you to find any other candidate right now running in West Virginia who's been to all 55 counties in the last 2 months, knocking on people's doors. That's what I've been doing because I want to hear what's important to people. And I know because I spent time in D.C., I know that if I get elected, it's very easy when you're in D.C. to fall into a bubble because you get surrounded by people who think you're great and they want to tell you what you want to hear, and they want to tell you that this is what you need to do instead of listening to people back in West Virginia. Well, I know the people in the state are pretty wise and pretty smart. And, people in DC certainly don't have any monopoly on common sense. In fact, lately, it's been very in short supply there. So, my model for being a public servant is always keeping one foot, back in the state, talking to people, and not just on my terms, but on their terms, meeting them where they are, doing town hall types experiences, just showing up in cafes and talking to people, really not separating myself from the people that I represent. When you're mayor of a city like Wheeling, it's impossible to separate yourself. I couldn't go to Kroger here without somebody cornering me. And, it's always in the frozen food aisle that they get you and cornering you and you want to talk about this or that. Well, when you're a senator, you have to make an extra effort to make sure that people can confront you and talk to you. But that's something I learned from working for Senator Byrd. He always kept his finger on the pulse of West Virginia, at least until he got well into his 90s. He always had his finger on the pulse of the state, and he did so by traveling, as unpretentiously as you can, and talking to people where they are, not just where you want to be seen.
What sets you apart from your opponent?
Where do I begin?
Sorry.
Like I said, my opponent was born incredibly wealthy and doesn't realize just how special or lucky he was to have that happen to him. I have nothing against people who are wealthy. I used to know Senator J. Rockefeller very well. Rockefeller was born with unspeakable wealth, but he took an effort to understand the plight of everyday people. Governor Justice has no idea what it's like, to go to the grocery store and get milk and actually, basically, try to survive in this society sometimes, on a single income or, try to put kids through school when, you don't have a built-in family network backing you. He doesn't know what it's like for a lot of people out there. He's never lived in a mobile home, I'm sure. He's never had to really had to work hard for anything that he has. A governor was the first office that he ran for, and he basically ran because he bought the Greenbrier, and that's the only reason that he was known. He didn't really work hard for that seat in the first place, and I don't think he knows the value of hard work. I do. Everything I have, I've worked hard for. I've had to scrap my way. I got in to college and law school on my own, and I financed them 100% myself. I didn't pay off all my student debts until I was 38 years old. I remember along the way, I was like 31 or 32. And when I think that Microsoft Money program had come out where you get your net worth on it, I think I was 32 years old and my net worth was zero because I'd finally paid down the $180,000 of debt that I had accumulated. I know what it's like to have to start, not really from here because you had to dig a hole to go to law school and college first, and actually start below there and actually work your way up. You know, and I think that makes me a much better person to represent the people of the state that remains one of the poor states, one of the least educated states, one of the lowest workforce participation rate states, and one of the least healthy states. You know, I know what people are going through because I've been that person, and I have people in my own life experiences. I've seen what they need and how they struggle. I think that makes me a better candidate. Add to the fact that my record as mayor in Wheeling is widely regarded by both Democrats and Republicans here as successful. Wheeling is a city on the rise in West Virginia right now, and I'm willing to say 5 years from now, everyone will be talking about Wheeling because of the work that we've done during the 8 years that I was mayor. By contrast, the governor's been governor of West Virginia for the last 8 years, and we're still last. We're next to last in just about all those categories that we were when he took office. So I don't think he's really made the impact that he thinks he has. His biggest economic development, announcements are because of the Biden administration, and really the thanks is owed to Senator Manchin for being that critical vote in the Senate to get them into law. So I really think if people look at the two of us objectively, take away the fact that he's got that grandfatherly charm when he comes on TV and he talks it with an aw shucks of folksiness. Forget the fact that he takes his bulldog everywhere. And look, I've got a dog too, a beautiful shelter dog. I just don't take him everywhere. If they actually look at the two of us, at where we began life and what we've accomplished along the way, I think it's not even close who the better qualified candidate is. It's just up for me because my biggest challenge in this race is name recognition. But the more people that know me, the more people like me. The governor's exact opposite. The people that know him best, the people in Lewisburg and McDowell County and Wyoming County who know him the best, actually like him the least because they know exactly how he is and that he doesn't pay his bills. So my challenge is to get more people to know me for who I am and more people to know him for exactly who he is.
I'm going to have a few more questions. I'm going to let you go.
Mm-hmm.
If elected, how do you plan to engage with your constituents regularly to ensure that their concerns are addressed?
Like I said before, I would make a point to be, in the state, at very regular intervals, and not just in Wheeling or Charleston or Huntington, but all over the state. I have really enjoyed traveling all 55 counties here this past couple months, going to some towns I'd never been to before, frankly, and talking to people in the corner cafes, talking to people in their neighborhoods, people who aren't used to talking to a Senate candidate and getting their unvarnished opinion on what the state needs. So, I've seen so much value in doing that I would certainly make an effort to travel the state regularly. Now, obviously, to be an effective senator, you have to spend a lot of time actually doing your job in D.C. So it would be a balance. But I think you have to make an effort to get back to West Virginia at regular intervals and make sure that people, if they want to come talk to you, if they want to speak to you one-on-one, they have the opportunity to do so. And not just select, like I said, I wouldn't just want to go to the major city centers. I'd want to get out to some of the more rural counties, get down to McDowell County where I began my tour back in June. Get to places where people aren't used to having statewide, office holders that show up, and do my best to keep my finger on that pulse. Because look, people's moods change, and the issues that are issues today may not be issues 2 or 3 years from now. We may be talking about a whole different set of things. It's incumbent on those of us who do get elected, though, to keep our finger on that pulse.
Glenn, can you share an experience or moment where it deeply influenced your political philosophy?
Something that deeply influenced my political philosophy. Look, growing up as I did, I grew up in a family in a household that was pretty much a Democratic household, but I never really, as a child, understood why. I was a Democrat versus a Republican. I tried to ask my grandparents about it when I was a young kid, and my grandfather of course, my grandfather had a picture of Franklin Roosevelt there in the dining room wall, just said something about Democrats look out for the little guy. And I didn't really know exactly what that meant, but I've always kind of thought of the Democratic Party as looking out for the underdog, looking out for the working class. To me, if you listen to Republicans talk these days, they see themselves as a party of the working class, which to me they're not. But that's the way they characterize themselves. And I think we as Democrats need to redefine exactly what we stand for in the and we need to frame it along, looking out for labor unions, looking out for people working, looking out for people living at the margins, looking out for groups, minorities, looking out for groups, members of the LGBTQ community who are often, victimized and, made to feel as other. We need to be the party that looks out for the underdog, looks out for the working class. That is our core, and that is when we're at our best. And I think sometimes we've lost that in the messaging. One of the things growing up for me that, in some respects, I lived a pretty, I had a wonderful childhood. I grew up and I'm a white male, so I grew up with that. I didn't have to deal with being a minority. I didn't have to deal with being a girl. But I did grow up with a pretty bad speech impediment, which I still have today. You could probably notice it's not nearly as bad as it used to be. That growing up with a stutter really taught me the E word I like to use, empathy. It taught me that we can live in a world that can sometimes be cruel. Bullies will always take what's theirs if you don't fight back for it. I think I identify with the Democratic Party in part because it is the party that stands up to bullies and that actually looks out for the underdogs. I'm actually, a lot of people think, if you have a stuttering problem or speech problem, like why would you ever get in politics? I consider it really a blessing to have been given the opportunity to put myself in other people's shoes and therefore have that help define my political ideology and identity. I think, we are the best as Democrats when we're putting ourselves in other people's shoes and trying to see the world through their eyes. Like I can't, as a white male, I can't begin to really, know what it's like to go through life as a black person or as a woman or as a black woman because of my own experience, but I can try. All right. I can try to ask myself, in life experiences, would this be different if it didn't look the way I do? And I've always tried to put myself in other people's shoes in whatever situation they're in. I think that's the ideology of the Democratic Party when it's at its best is the party of empathy, the party of being someone who will stand up to bullies. And I think that is needed more than anything else right now in our current political discourse.
Two more questions.
All right. I see our time is running down here, so I don't know.
Okay.
I see 2 minutes and 40. So,
okay. Glenn, what is the one piece of legislation would you champion from day one if elected?
Well, look, I think the Biden administration has done some good work on infrastructure, but driving around West Virginia the past couple months has showed me there's so much more that needs to be done, not only with brick and mortar and concrete infrastructure, but broadband and cell service infrastructure as well. Also, sort of power grid infrastructure as well. So I would like to see another major infrastructure effort put together so that we connect more parts of the country. We have so many parts of West Virginia that lack adequate broadband and lack basic cell service. For a state to try to attract young people and then ask them to live in places that don't have good cell service or broadband is to defy the reality that we live in a very connected world. You can't be deconnected from the world and do most jobs anymore. You can't even be a citizen for a lot of things, go online to pay your bills anymore now if you don't have access to broadband or cell service. So, we have a lot of gaps across our state that, aren't being filled because the private sector doesn't see any benefit in doing so. We need to look at ways to incentivize more investments in actually connecting more parts of this country, especially for a state like ours that has so many rural pockets. We need to get them better connected so we can be a beacon for young people to start moving back into the state to take advantage of all of our natural beauty our low cost of living, all the things, our relative safety compared to a lot of other states. We have so many things going for us, but if we can't connect ourselves to the outside world, they're never going to come here. People aren't going to come to appreciate it.
Okay. Now, of course, we said 1 hour, but we can go over. That's not a problem. But
All right, yeah, I'm here as long as you want. I was just looking at the clock counting down. I just didn't know if it was going to cut off at some point.
Final question.
Yeah.
Why should the voters choose Glenn Elliott as the next senator for the state of West Virginia in the Senate?
Well, all right. Well, I'll say this. Look, a lot of folks are focused on the presidential election this year for good reason. It's an important election. It's an historic election. Whatever way it goes, I get that people are focused on that. But if you look back, this particular Senate seat that I'm running for 65 years has been predominantly held by two men who showed up every day, who put in the work, who built relationships, and who delivered for West Virginia. Whether you like their politics or not, both Senator Byrd and Senator Manchin have delivered for West Virginia over and over and over again. If you look at this Senate race right now, I'm the only person running who has the type of experience and work ethic to where I could go to Washington, serve there long enough to build some seniority, because the Senate is, at the end of the day, a seniority-based institution, and actually put his head down and do the work and build relationships across the aisle to leverage and then leverage those relationships for the benefit of West Virginia. I'm the only candidate running who's going to be able to do that. The governor is not in good health to begin with, so whether he even goes to Washington at all, it is an open question. He's made clear, he said last week or the week before, he doesn't plan on winning any attendance records if he goes to D.C. Well, shame on him for that, because why would you run for an office where you don't want to be there? He said the week before that, he said not a fiber of his being even wants to be in D.C. Well, look, I'm running for this position because I do want to go to D.C. on behalf of West Virginia, and I will put in the work. If you ask anyone, even my detractors here in Wheeling, about my work ethic and about the energy I put into my part-time marriage position, they will tell you that I was out there each and every day, advocating for my city. I'll do the same for my state. And I'm young enough to where I can go to the Senate, stay there long enough to build some seniority and continue on that proud tradition that this particular Senate seat has. I don't see the governor being in good enough health to even finish his first term, let alone be there long enough to get reelected, where it really takes, a second term to where you get to actually do things in the Senate. Both Byrd and Manchin, it took them some time before they developed all those relationships and that seniority. I've got the time to do it. So if voters want someone, who's going to show up each and every day to put the work in, I'm your guy. Look, I recognize that for me to win this race, it's going to take, I need Democrats to come out, in better numbers than they have been coming out. But I also going to need some independents and Republicans who may be voting for former President Trump to give me their consideration. And I'll say this, out of those folks, we may not see eye to eye on every issue, but we can walk hand in hand towards a common goal. I'm not going to run for Senate and just be a Senate for Democrats. If I get in there, I'd be a senator for all of West Virginia's. I would work with any president that tries to help West Virginia, and I would stand up. I would stand up to any president who tries to hurt West Virginia. I learned that lesson from Senator Byrd when I worked for Byrd. Bill Clinton was president at that time. They were both Democrats. You think they would work well together. Well, if you ask President Clinton about his experience with Senator Byrd, he would probably tell you that no one was a bigger thorn in his side on the Senate, because Byrd was always standing up to Clinton on this or that issue. I would feel the same way if I'm elected senator and there's a Democratic president in there. I'm not going to take orders from that president. Just as if there's a Republican president, I'm not going to refuse to work with them. I will work with anyone in the Oval Office, when it comes to ways for helping West Virginia. I have that independent-minded streak to me. But if you look at my values, if you look at my work ethic, if you look at my experience, if you look at my relative, I'm 52, so I could serve there long enough to where I could build up seniority and do good for our state. It's a very clear choice who West Virginia voters should trust with this very important, critical Senate seat this November.
Glenn Elliott running for the U.S. Senate for West Virginia. Thank you for coming to Our Voices. You take care and be safe, okay?
Thank you so much, Ray. I really enjoyed it.
Don't go anywhere yet. Hold on.